I haven't seen anything to indicate that just because you have a name like Blackfoot, that you are somehow descended from the original people of the Americas.
Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be diving deep into the intricate world of quote unquote black and indigenous identities, where myths are going to be debunked, history will be examined, and our multifaceted selves are celebrated. Today we'll unravel some common misconceptions, tackle issues of historical accuracy, and challenge narrow views on identity. So I came across this video on, I don't even know how to pronounce this man's name. Um how do I say it? Shoot, I don't even know how to say it, y'all. Uh Dr. Runoko Rashid. I'm just gonna call him Rashid for the rest of this video because I can't pronounce that. I'm not even trying to be rude, y'all. I'm just saying. I just can't pronounce it. So buckle up as we explore the rich tapestry of our heritage, full of complexity and nuance. I'm going to go ahead and show y'all this video of him talking about why African Americans think they are Aboriginal Native American Indians. So, yeah, let's dive deep into it, y'all, and I will come back with further commentary after I show y'all this video.
I haven't seen anything to indicate that just because you have a name like Blackfoot, that you are somehow descended from the original people of the Americas. Cherokee owned African slaves. A lot of people don't know that. We talk about a lot of times that we had a harmonious relationship with Native Americans, but it wasn't always like that. Some Native Americans actually were slave owners. The group of Native Americans that I have the most respect for are the Seminoles, because in Florida, people call Seminoles and African, the descendants of enslaved Africans fought together. And we even know the names of some of them. There's a brother named John Horse. There's a Native American hero named Wildcat, who was very much a champion of African people. There are people like Osceola. But I haven't seen any indication that these Native American groups, which we are claiming relationships with, are really the descendants of the first people in the Americas. In other words, to make a long story short, I think this Aboriginal thing is nonsense. I think it's anti-African. I think it's destructive to our community, and it should be nipped in the bud. And anybody who engages in any kind of critical thinking wouldn't have any difficulty finding the fallacy of it. As a matter of fact, I even question whether it's an African thing. I think that you have white supremacist organizations that plant these seeds, even give false African identities to further split the African community. I'm a Pan-Africanist. I believe in the global unity of African people, and anything that attempts to sabotage that, I'm opposed to. And so this Aboriginal indigenous nonsense, which is just that, to me is one of the worst things that's happened to our community in a very long time, and it needs to be called as such. Much of it, I think, stems from an anti-Africanism. I think that there are people in our community who would rather be called turds in the toilet than an African. I do believe that, because we've been taught to be so ashamed of Africa. And so I think that feeds this Aboriginal indigenous nonsense. And I think a lot of it is the result of a lack of critical thinking, and that people confuse the first arrivals with indigenous. People of African heritage were the first people to settle the Western Hemisphere, the Western world. But there's a very different. It's very different to say that we were the first to come here than to say that we are the direct descendants of those original African people, and that's the problem.
First up, let's address the notion that having a name like Blackfoot discredits one's claim to indigenous ancestry. Historically, Blackfoot wasn't just a tribal designation, it was a term used to describe people of mixed Black and indigenous heritage. And not only that, but I have came across a book called Louisiana Creoles, Cultural Recovery and Mixed Race Native American Identity by Paula Gunn Allen years ago. And it talked about how Ishuk Nation was also known as Blackfoot. I'm going to read y'all guys an excerpt from the book. So it says, and I quote, American Indian communities such as the Atacapas, Ishuks, also known as the Opelousas, sorry for not pronouncing that right, or Blackleg slash Blackfoot, the Clifton Choctaw, the United Huma Nation, and the Red Bones living along the Sabine and Red Rivers are but four of the communities that have intermarried with European, primarily French and Spanish, and African populations, mainly from Senegambia, Senegal, and Gambia, areas before 1743 to form the Creole population. So, with that being said, it's not just about being mixed race. If Atacapa Ishik Nation, an indigenous nation, is also known as Blackfoot, what is that saying? And yes, people say that Ishik Nation is mixed race, but what people also fail to realize is that the rich identity and culture of Ishik Nation is responsible for the Zydeco dance and other indigenous traditions that we hold near and dear to our hearts today. So it's good to keep that in mind. And also, historical records show that terms like Blackfoot were sometimes used to informally to refer to individuals who had both Black and American Indian ancestry, especially in regions where these communities intermingled, like how the book mentioned. This isn't just folklore, it's grounded in historical interactions and alliances. According to scholar William Lauren Katz in Black Indians, A Hidden Heritage, these terms reflect a real historical phenomenon where Black and Indigenous communities often intermarried and formed alliances. And again, I'm using Black vaguely here, so just letting y'all guys know before y'all go in the comment section yelling, "We're not Black." Okay, well, if you're not Black, then I'm not talking about you. Okay, there we go. And also, let's talk about him saying indigenous people owned African slaves. The reality of Cherokee and other indigenous groups owning slaves is an important and complex historical fact. It's crucial to acknowledge this, but it's equally vital to understand the full context. We all know the type of natives they referring to, and it's literally the white one or the mixed white natives. Like, why don't people ever talk about that? People never mention that the people that they deem as native that owned African slaves or Black slaves are literally mixed race natives with European ancestry. They fail to mention that each and every time. And it's important that we add that context, because what people fail to understand and realize is that, like I mentioned before, a lot of these natives, a lot of these modern day natives, many of them, a lot of them, if not most, are mixed raced. They are heavily, heavily mixed with European people. So it's good to add that context because, yeah, of course, someone who is supposedly native that owns a Black slave, yeah, I would definitely see them owning a Black person because look at who they are in proximity to. Context matters. Looking at the imagery matters. You can't tell me that this person on the screen right here is a full blooded American Indian, because he's not. He's just not. But yet, this is what people think when we say we are Aboriginal American. Like, we're not claiming these people, they are claiming us, period. And you guys, I have to address this because this irks my nerve that anytime someone who is Black appearing or has what people associate as Black features, if they claim anything other than African, people want to say that they're anti Black, anti African, or they hate themselves. The assertion that exploring indigenous roots is somehow anti Black is a flawed argument. This perspective often stems from a misunderstanding of identity and heritage. Exploring one's full heritage is not an act of self hate or denial of Black roots, it's actually an act of self love and self acceptance. It's a journey to embrace every facet of one's background. Research by anthropologist Dr. Robin Kelly in Africa Speaks America Answers Modern Jazz in Revolutionary Times, reveals that identity is not a monolithic construct. Instead, it is a dynamic interplay of various influences. Embracing indigenous ancestry doesn't diminish Black heritage, but enriches it by acknowledging the multifaceted nature of our histories. And people just need to get over it. Like, people need to get over their colonized way of thinking. Yeah, I said it. Like, honestly, this dude was speaking so colonized. It was just hurting my brain because one minute is, oh, the white man is evil. The white man, you know, has this hurtful way of thinking of people identity, and they want to destroy the Black man and Black woman, and la la la, they want to control our minds. But when it comes to other people heritage and identity, then all of a sudden they want to put the same tactics and racial classifications that the colonizers forced upon people onto people who are fully embracing their heritage. It just doesn't make any sense. If you think for yourself, but don't use colonist talking points to try and justify being hateful towards people who embrace who they are. I can't understand it and I won't. Anyway, let's talk about Pan Africanism and how people act like it's the only path to unity. Pan Africanism, while it was a powerful movement for unity among Black people, it still has its limitations. And a lot of people say that Pan Africanism is dead, which, in my opinion, it really is. But anyway, some interpretations of Pan Africanism can inadvertently marginalize individuals with diverse ancestries, including those with indigenous roots. And not to mention that there are indigenous people around the world that look quote unquote Black or African, but yet they are indigenous to that landmass. They are indigenous to that area. So are they self-hating because they don't want to call themselves Black or African and they want to identify with what their ancestors identified as for thousands, if not millions of years? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, this singular focus that you can only be Black is so detrimental to the growth of people's mind and keeps people in a colonial mindset, which I thought people were trying to stem away from. Like, everybody want to yell out decolonize your mind, but somehow want to keep the colonizer tactics on one's identity prevalent. It just doesn't make any sense. And also, since people want to talk about Pan Africanism and being Afrocentric, let's talk about scholar and activist Dr. Molifi Kente Asante. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing his name right. In his book, The Afrocentric Idea, argues that true unity must include recognition of diverse identities within the Black diaspora. The celebration of mixed heritage and exploration of various ancestral roots should be seen as a complement to Pan African ideals, not a challenge to them. Unity does not require uniformity, it requires an acceptance of our shared and varied histories. Also, I want to talk about the claim that exploring indigenous identity is a white supremacist plot is super ignorant and just straight up gross. It's just a narrow way of thinking, and it doesn't do anybody good. This notion ignores the deeply rooted histories and experiences of indigenous and Black communities. And not to mention, Pan Africanists, pro Blacks, and those alike love saying how African people are so advanced and they sailed the seven seas and they visited all these different places and colonized them and settled there. So it's like, which one is it? Like, we're Africans being all over the world, or weren't they? Like, you can't sit here and say that Africans are these great people and that they were, populating the whole world, but somehow left, North and South America empty. It just doesn't make any sense. And historically, you know, there is talk and even proof of Africans coming here before Columbus. Like, we all have heard of the Moors. Hello. Okay, but anyway, according to historian Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz in an Indigenous Peoples History of the United States, both Indigenous and Black histories have been subjected to systematic erasure and distortion. This distortion often manifests as denial of the complex ways in which different groups have interacted, intermarried, and contributed to each other's histories. So I just don't buy into the whole notion that, oh, if you don't want to claim to be black, you just hate yourself. Like, okay, by your standards, if you think I hate myself because I celebrate and honor each and every heritage I come from that I know of, then that's fine with me. Like, your opinion does not prove my identity. It just doesn't. And that's what is so important when it comes to really embracing your heritage. You don't allow people to make up your own family history because you know your family history. You have the documentation to back it up and prove it, so you don't let other people tell you who you are. People want to say, oh, black people were first in the Americas. Like, I don't fall into the trap of racial categories, because what one person would say is black, another person would say is Aboriginal American. And what one person would say Aboriginal American, the other person would say is black. And so what people fail to understand and realize is that North, South, Central Americas, they don't look like what people think that they should look. They don't, I mean, let's just be for real. There are skin tones ranging from light to dark throughout the Americas before Christopher Columbus. Same with hair texture, from straight to coily, kinky hair. Those textures been in the Americas prior to Columbus. So if you're just going to go off on racial classifications to identify people, then quite frankly, you're no better than a colonizer. Some people are going to be like, Yona, that's harsh. But it's like, why do people feel the need to use racial classifications to justify the things that they say? I'm a firm believer in identifying with the nation or nations you come from. I don't understand with this pedalization of race and the social constructs of race. I don't get it. But that's just me though. The notion that genealogy and identity must conform to a single racial or ethnic category is a relic of outdated, racist, prejudiced, white supremacist thinking. Modern genetic studies, such as those reviewed in The Genealogy of the Human Race by Dr. Spencer Wells, show that human genetics is a complex web of ancestry rather than a simple, clean line. Many modern indigenous people have significant European ancestry due to historical intermarriages and colonial impacts. And this is what people fail to mention. So when they always trying to compare you melanated Aboriginal Americans with modern day natives, it's like, yeah, of course we're not going to look like them. Of course we're not going to share the same DNA as them. These people are heavily mixed race. Like how they want to sit here and say that, oh, we're mixed with indigenous and black. They are mixed with native and white. And that's why I call them white natives. Some people can get mad. People can sit there and say they disagree. But the truth of the matter is, these are mixed white people that people are comparing us to. So it just is what it is. For example, a study by the National Library of Medicine published in Genetic Variation Among Native Americans show that many modern Native American populations exhibit varying degrees of European genetic markers. This complexity underscores the fallacy of rigid racial categories and highlights the importance of acknowledging the full spectrum of genetic and cultural heritage. And I would also like to add with historical context, because again, people love to overlook the fact that the people that they deem as full blooded indigenous people are actually mixed race and have heavy amounts of European ancestry. Like a lot of these indigenous people that people compare us to, they be having white fathers, white mothers, white grandparents, but somehow we're supposed to be less than them because we supposedly have quote unquote black grandparents or ancestors. Like, come on now. So, how is it? And I already know because of the one drop rule, but somehow having white ancestry doesn't cancels your indigenous ancestry, but having quote unquote black ancestry or African ancestry does. It just doesn't make any sense. And again, I don't trust anybody fully who still uses the one drop rule as a tool to measure someone's identity. Like honestly, it just gives colonized, like you're colonized in the mind, and people need to heal that aspect of their mind, or otherwise they're going to pass away thinking that the European constructs of race and identity are correct and factual, when in fact it's not. Understanding identity and heritage requires embracing the evolution of one's essence rather than succumbing to shallow narratives. The exploration of Black and Indigenous heritage is not about denying any part of one's identity, but about recognizing and celebrating the full abundance of one's background. Because I think a lot of people forget that biracial and multiracial people exist, and that at conception, when the fetus is developing, we get 50% of each parent's DNA. And that's a scientific fact. So it's like people cannot ignore their heritage just because people don't like it and want them to submit to one type of thinking or to this box that they want them to check off on. Like it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, okay? And not only that, but people are mad at the simple fact that we are acknowledging populations that they see as black as indigenous people. And quite frankly, I'm not apologizing for that. People want us to be quiet about Africans visiting the Americas prior to Columbus. They want us to ignore the fact that people that they would deem black were in the Americas prior to Columbus and had no DNA with Africans. They were just a group of their own. I won't be silent about that either. These are things that people need to know about. And people need to know that multiracial people, biracial people, you melanated Aboriginal Americans are constantly excluded from the conversations of Indigenous identity. And quite frankly, it's just disgusting because no one has a problem calling these mixed white natives Native Americans and putting them on a pedestal. But when it comes to someone who is biracial or multiracial or have black and indigenous, or is indigenous but looks black, they want to categorize them as something completely different. No, we're not going for that. I'm not going for that. Our journey is a testament to the diverse nature of human history and the resilience of people who have navigated and shaped their identities amidst centuries of change and challenge. And this is just me, but I say let's move forward with a more nuanced understanding, one that honors all aspects of our histories and identities and rejects the outdated and racist narratives that seek to limit our understanding of who we truly are.